Time went by. Hard to say how much. A quarter of an hour, 20 minutes. A cricket chirped in one of the backyards. Sam came in to see if I wanted anything before he went home for the night. I told him no, I didn't. It was all right, run along. He stood there for a minute, head down. Then I saw him shake it slightly, as if it's something he didn't like. "What's the matter?" I asked. "You know what that means? My old mammy told it to me, and she never told a lie in her life. I never once seen it to miss either." "What, the cricket?" "Any time you hear one of them things, that's a sign of death, someplace close around." I swept the back of my hand at him. "Well, it isn't in here, so don't let it worry you." He went out, muttering stubbornly. "It's somewhere close by, though. Somewhere not very far off. Got to be." The door closed after him, and I stayed there alone in the dark. It was a stifling night, much closer than the one before. I could hardly get a breath of air even by the window at which I sat. I wonder how he, that unknown over there, could stand it behind those drawn shades. Then suddenly, just as idle speculation about this whole matter was about to alight in some fixed point in my mind, crystallized into something like suspicion, up came the shades again, and off it flitted, as formless as ever, and without having had a chance to come to rest on anything. He was in the middle windows, the living room. He'd taken off his coat and shirt, was bare-armed in his undershirt. He hadn't been able to stand it himself, I guess. The sultriness. I couldn't make out what he was doing at first. He seemed to be busy in a perpendicular up-and-down way, rather than lengthwise. He remained in one place, but he kept dipping out of sight, and then straightening up into view again, at irregular intervals. It was almost like some sort of calisthenic exercise, except that the dips and rises weren't evenly timed enough for that. Sometimes he stayed down a long time, sometimes he'd bob right up again, sometimes he'd go down 2 or 3 times in rapid succession. There was some sort of widespread black V railing him off from the window. Whatever it was, there was just a sliver of it, showing above the upward inclination, to which the window-sill deflected my line of vision. All it did was strike off the bottom of his undershirt, to the extent of 1/16 of an inch maybe. But I hadn't seen it there at other times, and I couldn't tell what it was. Suddenly, he left it for the first time since the shades had gone up, came out around it to the outside, stopped down into another part of the room, and straightened again, with an armful of what looked like vari-colored pennants at the distance at which I was. He went back behind the V, and allowed them to fall across the top of it for a moment, and stay that way. He made one of his dips down out of sight, and stayed that way a good while. The pennants, slung across the V, kept changing color, right in front of my eyes. I have very good sight. One moment they were white, the next red, the next blue. Then I got it. They were a woman's dresses, and he was pulling them down to him one by one, taking the topmost one each time. Suddenly they were all gone. The V was black and bare again, and his torso had reappeared. I knew what it was now, and what he was doing. The dresses had told me. He confirmed it for me. He spread his arms to the ends of the V. I could see him heave and hitch, as if exerting pressure. And suddenly the V had folded up, became a cubed wedge. Then he made rolling motions with his whole upper body, and the wedge disappeared off to one side. He'd been packing a trunk, packing his wife's things into a large upright trunk. He'd reappeared at the kitchen window presently, stood still for a moment. I saw him draw his arms across his forehead not once, but several times, then whip the end of it off into space. Sure, it was hot work for such a night. Then he reached up along the wall and took something down. Since it was the kitchen he was in, my imagination had to supply a cabinet and a bottle. I could see the 2 or 3 quick passes his hand made to his mouth after that. I said to myself tolerantly, that's what 9 men out of 10 would do after packing a trunk. Take a good stiff drink. And if the 10th didn't, it would only be because he didn't have any liquor at hand. Then he came closer to the window again, and standing edgewise to the side of it, so that only a thin paring of his head and shoulders showed. peered watchfully out into the dark quadrilateral, along the line of windows, most of them unlighted by now once more. He always started on the left-hand side, the opposite side to mine, and made a circuit of inspection from there on around. That was the second time in one evening I'd seen him do that, and once at daybreak, made 3 times altogether. I smiled mentally. You'd almost think he felt guilty about something. It was probably nothing, just an odd little habit, a quirk, that he didn't know he had himself. I had them myself. Everyone does. He withdrew into the room again, and it blacked out. His figure passed into the one that was still lighted next to it, the living room. That blacked next. It didn't surprise me that the third room, the bedroom with the drawn shade, didn't light up on his entering there. He wouldn't want to disturb her, of course, particularly if she was going away tomorrow for her health, as his packing of her trunk showed. She needed all the rest she could get before making the trip, simple enough for him to slip into bed in the dark. It did surprise me, though, when a match flare went some time later, to have it still come from the darkened living room. He must be lying down in there, trying to sleep on the sofa or something for the night. He hadn't gone near the bedroom at all, was staying out of it altogether. That puzzled me, frankly. That was carrying solicitude almost too far. 10 minutes or so later, there was another match wink, still from that same living room. He couldn't sleep. The night brooded on both of us alike. The curiosity-monger in the bay window, the chain-smoker in the 4th-floor flat without giving any answer. The only sound was that interminable cricket. I was back at the window again, with the first sun of morning. Not because of him. My mattress was like a bed of hot coals. Sam found me there when he came in to get things ready for me. "You're going to be a wreck, Mr. Jeff," was all he said. First, for a while, there was no sign of life over there. Then, suddenly, I saw his head bob up from somewhere down out of sight in the living room. So I knew I'd been right. He spent the night in the sofa or easy chair in there. Now, of course, he'd look in at her, to see how she was, find out if she felt any better. That was only common, ordinary humanity. He hadn't been near her, so far as I could make out, since 2 nights before. He didn't. He dressed, and he went in the opposite direction, into the kitchen, and wolfed something in there, standing up and using both hands. Then he suddenly turned, and moved offside, in the direction in which I knew the flat entrance to be, as if he just heard some summons, like the doorbell. Sure enough, in a moment he came back, and there were 2 men with him in leather aprons, expressmen. I saw him standing by while they laboriously maneuvered that cubed black wedge up between them, in the direction they'd just come from. He did more than just stand by. He practically hovered over them, kept shifting from side to side. He was so anxious to see that it was done right. Then he came back alone, and I saw him swipe his arm across his head, as though it was he, not they, who was all heated up from the effort. So he was forwarding her trunk to wherever it was she was going. That was all. He reached up along the wall again and took something down. He was taking another drink. 2, 3. I said to myself, a little at a loss, "Yes, but he hasn't just packed a trunk this time. That trunk has been standing packed and ready since last night. Where does the hard work come in? The sweat and the need for a bracer?" Now at last, after all those hours, he finally did go into her. I saw his form pass through the living room and go beyond into the bedroom. Up went the shade that had been down all this time. Then he turned his head and looked around behind him, in a certain way, a way that was unmistakable, even from where I was. Not in one certain direction, as one looks at a person, but from side to side, and up and down, and all around, as one looks at an empty room. He stepped back, bent a little, gave a fling of his arms, and an unoccupied mattress and bedding upended over the foot of the bed stayed that way, emptily curved. A second one followed a moment later. She wasn't in there. They used the expression delayed action. I found out then what it meant. For 2 days, a sort of formless uneasiness, a disembodied suspicion, I don't know what to call it, had been flitting and vol-planning around in my mind, like an insect looking for a landing place. More than once, just as I had been ready to settle, some slight reassuring thing, such as the raising of the shades after they had been down unnaturally long, had been enough to keep it winging aimlessly, prevent it from staying still long enough for me to recognize it. The point of contact had been there all along, waiting to receive it. Now, for some reason, within a split second after he tossed the empty mattresses, it landed. Zoom! And the point of contact expanded, or exploded, whatever you dare to call it, into a certainty of murder. In other words, the rational part of my mind was far behind the instinctive subconscious part. Delayed action. Now the one had caught up to the other. The thought message that sparked from the synchronization was, he's done something to her. I looked down and my hand was bunching the goods over my kneecap. It was knotted so tight. I forced it to open. I said to myself steadily, now wait a minute. Be careful. Go slow. You've seen nothing. You know nothing. You only have the negative proof that you don't see her anymore. Sam was standing there looking over me from the pantryway. He said accusingly, you ain't touched a thing, and your face looks like a sheet. It felt like one. It had that needling feeling when the blood has left it. It was more to get him out of the way and give myself some elbow room for undisturbed thinking than anything else that I said, Sam, what's the street address of that building down there? Don't stick your head too far out and gape at it. Something or other Benedict Avenue. He scratched his neck helpfully. I know that. Chase around the corner a minute and get me the exact number on it, will you? What'd you want to know that for? He asked as he turned to go. None of your business, I said, with the good-natured firmness that was all that was necessary to take care of that once and for all. I called after him, just as he was closing the door. And while you're about it, step into the entrance and see if you can tell from the mailboxes who has the 4th floor rear. Don't get me the wrong one now, and try not to let anyone catch you at it. He went out, mumbling something that sounded like, when a man ain't got nothing to do but just sit all day, you can sure think up the blamest things. The door closed, and I settled down to some good constructive thinking. I said to myself, what are you really building up this monstrous supposition on? Let's see what you've got. Only that there were several little things wrong with the mechanism, the chin belt of their recurrent daily habits over there. 1. The lights were on all night in the first night. 2. He came in later than usual the second night. 3. He left his hat on. 4. She didn't come out to greet him. She hasn't appeared since the evening before the lights were on all night. 5. He took a drink after he finished packing her trunk. But he took 3 stiff drinks the next morning, immediately after her trunk went out. 6. He was inwardly disturbed and worried, yet superimposed upon this was an unnatural external concern about the surrounding rear windows that was off-key. 7. He slept in the living room, didn't go near the bedroom during the night before the departure of the trunk. Very well. If she had been ill that first night, and he had sent her away for her health, that automatically cancelled out points 1, 2, 3, 4. It left points 5 and 6 totally unimportant and unincriminating. But when it came up against 7, it hit a stumbling block. If she went away immediately after being ill that first night, why didn't he want to sleep in their bedroom last night? Sentiment? Hardly. 2 perfectly good beds in one room, only a sofa or uncomfortable easy chair in the other. Why should he stay out there if she was already gone? Just because he missed her? Was lonely? A grown man doesn't act that way. All right, then she was still in there. Sam came back at this point and said, that house is number 525 Benedict Avenue, the 4th floor rear. It got the name of Mr. and Mrs. Laws Forward up. Shh, I silenced, and motioned him backhand out of my ken. First he wanted, then he don't, he grumbled, philosophically, and retired to his duties. I went ahead digging at it. But if she was still there, in that bedroom last night, then she couldn't have gone away to the country, because I never saw her leave today. She could have left without my seeing her in the early hours of yesterday morning. I'd missed a few hours, been asleep. But this morning, I'd been up before he was himself. I only saw his head rear up from that sofa after I'd been at the window for some time. To go at all, she would have had to go yesterday. Then why had he left the bedroom shade down, left the mattress undisturbed until today? Above all, why had he stayed out of that room last night? That was evidence that she hadn't gone, was still in there. Then today, immediately after the trunk had been dispatched, he went in, pulled up the shade, tossed over the mattresses, and showed that she hadn't been in there. The thing was like a crazy spiral. No, it wasn't either. Immediately after the trunk had been dispatched. The trunk. That did it. I looked around to make sure the door was safely closed between Sam and me. My hand hovered uncertainly over the telephone dial a minute. Boyne. He'd be the one to tell about it. He was on homicide. He had been anyway when I last seen him. I didn't want to get a flock of strange dicks and cops into my hair. I didn't want to be involved any more than I had to. Or at all, if possible.